A magistrate in Carbon County says there's enough evidence to send Luis Sierra to trial for the 1976 murder of then 15-year-old Evelyn Colon.
Today is going to be justice for the Colon family because of what he did.
On December 20, 1976, beneath a bridge along Interstate 80 in Carbon County, Pennsylvania, a teenage boy made a discovery that would haunt investigators for nearly half a century. 3 suitcases, discarded like trash along the frozen banks of the Lehigh River. Inside those weathered cases lay the brutally dismembered remains of a young woman and her full-term female fetus. Victims of unspeakable violence, their identities seemingly erased from existence. For 44 years, she would be known only as Beth Doe. Her real name, her story, her life before death, all lost to time. The young mother-to-be, just weeks away from giving birth, had been strangled, shot, dismembered, and packed away, as if someone believed they could make her disappear forever. But some secrets refused to stay buried. Today, we're exploring one of forensic genealogy's most remarkable cold case breakthroughs. The identification of Beth Doe as 15-year-old Evelyn Colon, and the arrest of the man who allegedly silenced her and her unborn daughter over 4 decades ago. This is a story of justice delayed but not denied, of a family who never stopped wondering what happened to their beloved Evelyn, and of investigators who refused to let a young mother and her child be forgotten. Her life was cut tragically short, but her story is finally being told. Evelyn Colon was born on April 17, 1961 in Jersey City, New Jersey. The daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants, she grew up in a close-knit household with her parents Oralia and Luis and her 4 siblings. Family photos show a smiling girl with bright eyes and a distinctive mole on her right cheek, a feature that would later help identify her remains. By all accounts, the Colon family was tight-knit, working class, and protective of their children. Evelyn was particularly close with her sister Migdalia, who would later recall her as a joyful person, always full of life. Like many teenage girls, Evelyn had dreams and hopes, none of which included becoming a tragic victim in a decades-long mystery. In the mid-1970s, the Colon family's next-door neighbor included a young man named Luis Sierra. At 19, he was 4 years older than Evelyn, an age gap that might seem small for adults but was big for a 15-year-old girl. The two began dating, and what started as teenage romance quickly grew into something more serious and concerning. By late 1976, Evelyn was 9 months pregnant with Sierra's child. Despite her young age, her parents reluctantly supported the couple moving into their own apartment, believing this would provide stability for their coming grandchild. But the warning signs were already there. According to Migdalia, Sierra showed controlling behavior from the start. He would reportedly lock Evelyn in their apartment, cutting her off from family and friends. Phone calls became her main way to stay in touch with loved ones. In the most chilling details, Evelyn had told her mother something that would haunt the family for decades. "If something happens to me," she told Oralia, "Luis would be responsible." Words that now seem less like teenage drama and more like a warning of the horror to come. By mid-December 1976, Evelyn was in the final weeks of her pregnancy. Her due date was quickly approaching, and like many expecting mothers, she wasn't feeling her best. One afternoon, she called her mother, Oralia. At that moment, her voice was weak. "Mom, I'm not feeling well," she said. "Could you bring me some soup?" It was a simple request, a daughter reaching out to her mother for comfort. Oralia, concerned for her pregnant daughter, agreed immediately. But when Oralia arrived at the apartment, she found something deeply troubling. The door was unlocked, the rooms were empty, Evelyn and Luis were gone. Neighbors told Oralia that the young couple had suddenly moved out, no forwarding address, no goodbye, no explanation. The family was confused and worried, but in January 1977, a ray of hope arrived in their mailbox. A letter, postmarked from Connecticut, written in Spanish. The letter claimed Evelyn had given birth to a healthy baby boy named Luis Sierra Jr. and that she was doing well. It said she would reach out if she needed anything. The Colon family, though concerned by the sudden move, believed the letter. Their Evelyn was safe. She was a new mother starting her own life. When they tried to report her missing years later, police turned them away because of that letter. Tragically, both Oralia and Luis Colon would eventually pass away, never knowing what happened to their daughter. They died still believing Evelyn was somewhere out there raising her son. They never learned the horrifying truth, that by the time that letter arrived, Evelyn and her unborn daughter were already dead, their remains discovered in those 3 suitcases along the Lehigh River. And that letter, it wasn't from Evelyn at all. December 20, 1976. A cold winter day in Carbon County, Pennsylvania. The Lehigh River flows beneath a bridge carrying Interstate 80, its banks partially frozen in the winter chill. A teenage boy explores the area beneath the bridge, perhaps looking for adventure or simply passing time. What he finds will change his life forever. 3 suitcases lie discarded near the riverbank, as if someone had hurriedly tossed them from the bridge above. 2 of the cases have broken open from the impact. What spills out is anyone's worst nightmare. Inside are the dismembered remains of a young woman and her nearly full-term female fetus. The 3rd suitcase contains more body parts. The cases themselves have been spray-painted black, wrapped in newspaper, and bound with a chenille bedspread. Pennsylvania State Police quickly take over the scene. The medical examiner's findings pointed towards something truly disturbing. The victim had been strangled, shot in the neck after death, and carefully dismembered with a serrated blade. Her head, ears, nose, and breasts had been severed. The unborn baby girl had been removed from her body after death. The autopsy estimates that death occurred within 24 hours of discovery, though investigators note that the cold weather may have preserved the remains longer. The brutality of the crime shocks the nation. News outlets across the country report on the grisly discovery. The young victim's pregnancy makes the crime all the more heinous in the public eye, but despite the media attention, no one comes forward to identify her. With no name, no identity, and no one to claim her, authorities designate her Beth Doe, a placeholder name for a woman whose real identity seems to have vanished as completely as her life. What investigators don't know is that her family isn't looking for her. They believe she's alive and well, raising a baby boy in Connecticut. For investigators, Beth Doe quickly became a frustrating puzzle. Her fingerprints yielded no matches in FBI databases. Early police sketches generated few leads. Every promising tip led nowhere. By 1983, with no breakthroughs in sight, Beth Doe was laid to rest in a cemetery in Weatherly, Pennsylvania. Her grave marker didn't bear a name, just another painful reminder that somewhere a family was missing a daughter they didn't even know was gone. But sometimes such cold cases are never truly forgotten. In 2007, investigators dug up Beth Doe's remains, hoping that advances in forensic science might finally give her back her name. They collected DNA samples and commissioned new facial reconstructions from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The latest reconstruction, completed in 2015, offered the most accurate depiction yet of what Beth Doe might have looked like in life. Scientists also conducted isotope analysis of her remains, which suggested she was born in Central or Western Europe and had immigrated to America as a child. A detail that would later prove misleading, as her Puerto Rican heritage wasn't properly interpreted from the findings. False leads continued to plague the investigation. In 2019, a theory emerged linking Beth Doe to a runaway foster child named Madeline Maggie Cruz. Investigators followed this lead eagerly, only to discover Cruz was alive and well. With each passing year, the case grew colder. The file on Beth Doe gathered dust as investigators moved on to more solvable cases. The nameless young mother and her unborn child seemed destined to remain among the thousands of unidentified remains across America, people without names, stories without endings. But science was about to change everything. 2020 marked a turning point for cold cases across America. The emerging field of genetic genealogy, the same technology that had identified the Golden State Killer 2 years earlier, was transforming unsolved cases across the nation. For Beth Doe, this scientific breakthrough would finally end decades of secrecy. Investigators sent a femur sample to a specialized lab in Texas. The DNA profile was then uploaded to a genealogy database where it waited for a potential match. The wait wasn't long. The system found a match to a living relative, Louis Colin Jr., Evelyn's nephew, who had uploaded his own DNA to the database simply to learn about his family history. He never imagined it would help solve a murder. His genetic connection led police to his father, Louis Colin Sr., Evelyn's brother. When investigators contacted him, his response was immediate. "I have a missing sister from 1976. The pieces quickly fell into place. Louis Sr. described Evelyn's identifying marks, a mole on her right cheek and a distinctive scar on her leg. Both matched Beth Doe perfectly. Family photos of Evelyn showed striking similarities to the facial reconstructions created over the years. For the Colin family, the news was devastating yet provided long-awaited answers. Evelyn hadn't abandoned them. She hadn't started a new life. She had been cruelly taken from them, her identity concealed for nearly half a century. With Evelyn finally identified, investigators turned their attention to Louis Sierra, her boyfriend at the time of her disappearance. Now in his 60s and living in Ozone Park, New York, Sierra had built a life while Evelyn lay in an unmarked grave. In March 2021, Pennsylvania State Police knocked on his door. After 44 years, they were about to ask him some very difficult questions about a pregnant 15-year-old girl who vanished just before Christmas 1976. When confronted at his home, Louis Sierra's story immediately began to unravel. At first, he denied even knowing Evelyn Colin. When pressed, he admitted to dating her, but claimed she had simply left after an argument. He couldn't explain the mysterious letter from Connecticut, nor could he account for his complete lack of effort to find her or their unborn child. On March 31, 2021, Pennsylvania State Police formally identified Beth Doe as 15-year-old Evelyn Colin and arrested Louis Sierra for her murder. At 63 years old, Sierra was taken into custody, 44 years after allegedly taking Evelyn's life. Sierra was extradited from New York to Pennsylvania, charged with criminal homicide and held without bail in Carbon County Prison. A preliminary hearing in April 2021 found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. By June 2022, Sierra's defense was attempting to suppress his 2021 police interview, claiming he wasn't properly given his Miranda rights. For the Colin family, the arrest brought both grief and relief. Led by Evelyn's niece, Miriam Colin Veltman, the family raised funds to visit Evelyn's gravesite, now finally marked with her real name after decades of anonymity. They also gave a name to the unborn child who never had a chance at life, Emily Grace Colin. As of March 2025, Sierra awaits trial. The Pennsylvania State Police and Carbon County District Attorney continue building their case, supported by tips from the public. For Evelyn Colin, justice may finally be within reach. Though she was known as Beth Doe for 44 years, she will now be remembered by her true name and by the family who never stopped wondering what happened to their beloved Evelyn. 3 black suitcases, a frozen riverbank, a 44-year mystery finally unraveling. The story of Evelyn Colin reminds us that time doesn't erase evidence. It simply waits for science to catch up. As Louis Sierra awaits his day in court, one question lingers in the cold Pennsylvania air. Will justice finally come for the teenage girl once known only as Beth Doe? Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell to uncover the next mysterious case on our channel, because some secrets refuse to stay buried.
The UK's worst child killer in modern times.
Nurse trusted, convicted of killing 7 babies in her care.
A neonatal intensive care unit, the gentle beeping of monitors, the soft hum of incubators, a place where the most fragile lives begin their journey under the eyes of those sworn to protect them. Between 2015 and 2016, at the Countess of Chester Hospital in northwest England, something baffling began happening. Babies who were stable suddenly collapsed. Infants expected to recover mysteriously died. Premature newborns who were improving suddenly suffered catastrophic drops in oxygen levels and heart rates that defied medical explanation. Doctors were baffled, parents were devastated, and through it all, one figure remained constant: a neonatal nurse named Lucy Letby. Described by colleagues as dedicated and professional, by friends as caring and cheerful, she was the last person anyone would suspect of harming the vulnerable infants in her care. Today we're examining one of the most disturbing cases in British criminal history. As the infant death toll mounted, hospital consultants began to notice a chilling pattern. The babies weren't dying from natural causes, and the person who was always present when these tragedies occurred wasn't there to save lives. She was there to end them. Lucy Letby was born on January 4, 1990 in Chester, England. She grew up as an only child in Hereford, where friends and neighbors always described her as quiet and unremarkable. After completing her education at the local comprehensive school, Letby pursued her dream of becoming a nurse at the University of Chester. In 2011, she graduated with a nursing degree and began working at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She chose to specialize in neonatal care, perhaps the most delicate area of nursing, where patients weigh mere pounds and every procedure must be performed with extraordinary precision. At the hospital, Letby quickly established herself as competent and dedicated. Colleagues would later describe her as professional, very thorough, and hard-working. She was trusted not only to care for the most vulnerable patients, but also to train new staff members. In 2015, the hospital even used her image in a campaign to raise funds for a new neonatal unit. Outside work, Letby led what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary life. She bought her own home in Chester, not far from the hospital. She maintained close friendships, went on vacation with her parents, and attended social events with colleagues. Nothing in her behavior suggested anything unusual. Parents of babies in the neonatal unit often formed bonds with Letby. She would take photographs of infants for their families, create keepsake cards with babies, footprints, and comfort parents during their difficult moments. Some even kept in touch with her after their children were discharged. The neonatal unit itself was a specialized environment housing premature and ill newborns, some weighing less than a pound, others born with serious medical conditions. These tiny patients required constant monitoring and care, their fragility making them entirely dependent on their caregivers. No one could have imagined that among those dedicated caregivers was someone who had chosen this environment for a sinister reason. Its vulnerability made it a perfect hunting ground. June 2015 marked the beginning of what doctors would later recognize as a disturbing trend. A premature baby boy referred to in court as Child A unexpectedly collapsed and died just hours after birth. The following day, his twin sister, Child B, suffered a sudden and severe drop in oxygen levels but was fortunately resuscitated. Over the following months, the pattern continued. Previously stable infants would suddenly have declining health without apparent medical cause. The neonatal unit, which typically saw only 1 or 2 deaths per year, recorded 8 deaths in 2015 and 6 in 2016, a staggering increase. Dr. Stephen Breary, the lead consultant pediatrician, noticed something else. These unexplained collapses were happening during night shifts, and one nurse, Lucy Letby, was almost always present. By June 2016, the consultants began connecting the dots. They noticed that some babies developed strange discolored patches on their skin. Others showed sudden and unexplainable drops in blood oxygen. Some suffered sudden bleeding or breathing problems. Many of the infants who collapsed had just been fed. The medical team compiled their concerns and presented them to hospital management. Their message was clear. Something was very wrong, and it seemed to follow Letby's shifts. Initially, hospital executives were reluctant to act on what seemed like an unthinkable accusation against a valued staff member. They suggested conducting an internal review first, focusing on procedures and equipment rather than personnel. But the consultants were increasingly convinced. Dr. Ravi Jayaram, another pediatrician, had caught Letby standing over a baby's incubator as the infant's oxygen levels dropped. When she noticed him, she offered no explanation. By July 2016, the consultants delivered an ultimatum to hospital management: remove Letby from the neonatal unit, or they would refuse to work with her. The hospital finally relented, moving her to clerical duties. But this action came too late for many families whose lives had already been shattered. In May 2017, nearly 2 years after the first suspicious death, the Countess of Chester Hospital finally contacted Cheshire Police. The hospital's medical director formally requested an investigation into the alarming number of infant deaths in the neonatal unit. What followed was one of the most complex medical investigations in British criminal history. Detectives from the Major Crime Unit began the painstaking process of reviewing thousands of pages of medical records, nursing logs, and hospital data. The investigation, codenamed Operation Hummingbird, quickly focused on 17 babies who had died or suffered serious harm between March 2015 and July 2016. Forensic investigators established a timeline for each case, mapping shifts, staff movements, and medical interventions. Amongst all of these, they noticed a disturbing pattern. Lucy Letby had been present during nearly every suspicious incident. When investigators analyzed work schedules, they found the mortality rate increased when she was working and dropped when she was on vacation. In July 2018, police made their move. Letby was arrested at her home in Chester on suspicion of murdering 8 babies and attempting to murder 6 others. After questioning, she was released on bail while investigations continued. Scientists examined medical equipment, medication vials, and feeding bags from the unit. They discovered evidence of tampering with IV bags and insulin injections. Medical experts reviewed each case, identifying similarities that defied coincidence. As evidence mounted, Letby was rearrested in June 2019 and again in November 2020 as investigators added more cases to their inquiry. Finally, on November 10, 2020, she was charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. The case that would shock the entire United Kingdom was finally heading to court. As prosecutors built their case against Lucy Letby, the horrifying methods of her crimes came into focus. Medical experts claimed she had used various techniques to harm babies in ways that might appear natural or as medical complications. Her primary method was injecting air into babies' bloodstreams or stomachs, causing painful air blockages that led to cardiac arrests or severe breathing difficulties. In other cases, she administered insulin to healthy babies, causing dangerous drops in blood sugar levels. Some victims were deliberately overfed with milk through feeding tubes, causing them to vomit and inhale the fluid into their lungs. Particularly disturbing was Letby's apparent targeting of multiple births. In 3 cases, she attacked twins. In another, she targeted triplets, murdering 2 and attempting to kill the 3rd on separate occasions. When police searched Letby's home, they discovered damning evidence. Hidden in a planner were handwritten notes that read, "I am evil, I did this." Another note simply stated, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them." Investigators also uncovered a disturbing digital trail. Letby had searched for the parents of her victims on Facebook, sometimes just hours after their babies had died or collapsed. She had repeatedly looked up one family 21 times after their child's death. Expert witnesses testified to the unprecedented nature of the case. One consultant noted that the chances of so many babies suffering unexpected collapses naturally was astronomically small. Letby avoided detection through calculated behavior. She was often the one who discovered the babies in distress, calling for help and even assisting in resuscitation efforts. Her seemingly professional attitude and willingness to help diverted suspicion. She also targeted babies when staffing was minimal, especially during night shifts when consultant doctors were not present. By the time experts recognized the pattern, multiple families had already experienced unimaginable loss. On October 10, 2022, at Manchester Crown Court, one of the longest and most disturbing criminal trials in British history began. Lucy Letby, now 32 years old, faced 22 charges, 7 counts of murder and 15 counts of attempted murder involving 17 babies. Prosecutor Nick Johnson KC laid out the case against Letby in stark terms. "A poisoner was at work in the neonatal unit," he told the jury. For 10 months, the prosecution carefully presented their evidence. Medical experts testified that the collapses and deaths represented a clear pattern of deliberate harm. Nursing records placed Letby at the scene of each incident. Consultants described their growing concern as more babies unexplainably crashed during her shifts. Perhaps most heartbreaking was the testimony from parents. One father described walking into the neonatal unit to find Letby standing over his dying child. A mother recalled how Letby had tried to comfort her after her baby's death, a baby she now stood accused of murdering. Throughout the trial, Letby maintained her innocence. Her defense argued that the babies had died from natural causes or poor hospital conditions. They suggested she was being scapegoated for systemic failures at the hospital. After 22 days of deliberations, one of the longest jury considerations in UK criminal history, the verdicts finally came on August 18, 2023. Lucy Letby was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others. The jury could not reach verdicts on 6 additional charges. As the verdicts were read, Letby showed no emotion. She had refused to attend court for the final days of the trial, choosing not to face the families whose lives she had destroyed. On August 21, 2023, Justice James Goss delivered his sentence. Lucy Letby would serve a whole life order. the most severe punishment in the British legal system, making sure she would never be released from prison.
Over a period of just under 13 months, you killed 7 fragile babies and attempted to kill 6 others. Some of your victims were only a day or a few days old. By their nature and number, such murders and attempted murders by a neonatal nurse entrusted to care for them are offences of very exceptional seriousness. Lucy Letby, on each of the 7 offences of murder and the 7 offences of attempted murder, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Because the seriousness of your offences is exceptionally high, I direct that the early release provisions do not apply. The order of the court, therefore, is a whole life order on each and every offence, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison.
The empty dock where Letby should have stood symbolized her final act of cowardice. She had refused to appear for her sentencing or hear the impact statements from devastated parents. You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies, Justice Goss stated to the absent defendant. You have caused deep psychological trauma. In emotional impact statements, parents described the devastating toll of Letby's crimes. One mother said she still suffered panic attacks. A father spoke of how their family had been living in a nightmare that no one can wake up from. In the aftermath, serious questions emerged about the hospital's handling of the case. Why had administrators delayed involving police despite the consultant's urgent warnings? Why was Letby allowed to continue working after early concerns were raised? The UK government announced an independent inquiry into how Letby had been able to kill repeatedly without earlier intervention. The hospital executives who had dismissed initial concerns faced calls for accountability. For the medical community, the case represented a significant breach of trust. Hospitals across Britain reviewed their safety protocols, particularly around tracking unexpected incidents and staff patterns. For the families, no verdict could restore what they had lost. But the knowledge that Letby would never again be free to harm another child provided at least the cold comfort of justice served. The case of Lucy Letby reminds us that evil can hide behind the most trusted faces, in the places we least expect to find it, even in the hands meant to nurture and protect our most vulnerable. As Lucy Letby serves her life sentence in prison, the families of her victims continue to search for answers that may never fully come. Share your thoughts on this devastating case in the comments below. What warning signs do you think were missed? Which tragic case should we examine next? Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell to uncover more stories of justice served that remind us that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones we never suspect until it's too late. Because even in our safest spaces, vigilance can mean the difference between life and death.
The trial of a Texarkana woman accused of killing a mother and cutting her unborn child from her womb.
Well, Taylor Parker has been sentenced to death for capital murder.
Continuing coverage now, Taylor Parker becomes the 7th woman on death row in Texas.
October 9, 2020, New Boston, Texas. A horrific scene unfolds inside a modest family home. 21-year-old Reagan Michelle Simmons Hancock lies dead on the floor, her body mutilated in the most unimaginable way. Her unborn child, a daughter just weeks from her due date, has been cut from her womb with a crude, improvised cut. Hours later, 30 miles away, a woman is pulled over for speeding. In her lap, a newborn gasps for breath, still attached to a placenta. "I just gave birth on the side of the road," she tells the officer. But the truth is far more sinister. For months, Taylor Parker had lived a life based on lies, convincing everyone, her boyfriend, her family, even her own children, that she was pregnant. As her fictional due date approached, so did her desperation. She needed a baby, at any cost. Today we're examining one of the most disturbing cases of deception and murder in recent memory. Unlike many cases we cover, this isn't a decades-old mystery. This is a modern nightmare where digital footprints, social media, and quick police work exposed a heinous truth. Sometimes the monster isn't hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they're hiding in plain sight beneath a mask of routine that no one thought to question. Reagan Michelle Simmons, a 21-year-old girl, was born and raised in the tight-knit community of New Boston, Texas. It was a small town of just under 5,000 people near the Arkansas border. Here, everyone knows their neighbors. Children grow up together, attend the same schools, and often build their adult lives within the same community. Reagan was loved by everyone, described by friends as vibrant and full of life. In her early 20s, she married Homer Hancock, and the couple settled into creating the life they dreamed of together. Their first daughter brought immeasurable joy to the young family. Photos on social media showed a smiling Reagan embracing motherhood trips to the park, holiday celebrations, quiet moments at home. These were the snapshots of a family building a foundation of love. By 2020, Reagan was pregnant with their second child, another daughter they had already named Braxlyn Sage. At 34 weeks along, Reagan's pregnancy was healthy and everything was normal. They had prepared the nursery, baby clothes washed and folded, hospital bag nearly packed. Around town, the Hancocks were seen as the ideal young family. Reagan worked at a local restaurant where customers and coworkers adored her. Homer was hardworking and devoted. They represented the kind of wholesome family values that small towns like New Boston take pride in. As Reagan entered her 8th month of pregnancy, her excitement was palpable. In just a few weeks, baby Braxlyn would join their family. Friends later recalled how Reagan had been glowing during those final weeks, eagerly counting down the days until she would hold her second daughter in her arms. She had no way of knowing that someone else had been watching her pregnancy unfold with a very different kind of hunger. While Reagan Hancock prepared for her growing family, Taylor Parker was crafting a story of her own. At 27, Parker lived in a nearby community with her boyfriend Wade Griffin. She already had 2 children from previous relationships, but they didn't live with her full-time. Parker's background wasn't remarkable. She, grown up in the same region, had a string of relationships and worked various jobs over the years. What set her apart was her extraordinary ability to convince others of her fabrications. In February 2020, Parker announced she was pregnant. She posted sonogram images, tracked her baby bump growth with regular photos, and shared updates about doctor's appointments. She held a gender reveal party where she announced she was having a boy. She named him Clancy. No detail was left overlooked. Parker joined online pregnancy groups. She discussed morning sickness and food cravings. She even complained about gestational diabetes. When friends saw her, she wore maternity clothes with a seemingly growing belly underneath. But there was no pregnancy. There was no Clancy. There were no doctor visits. What nobody knew was that Parker had undergone a hysterectomy years earlier. Having another biological child was physically impossible for her. Her internet history would later reveal thousands of searches: how to fake being pregnant, fake a pregnancy belly, fake ultrasound photos. She had studied the language of pregnancy, learning how to discuss symptoms and milestones with the conviction of someone actually experiencing them. As her fake due date in November approached, Parker faced mounting pressure. Her boyfriend had remodeled a room as a nursery. Friends had thrown her a baby shower. Family members were eager to meet the new arrival. She had built a tower of lies that was about to collapse unless she found a baby to present as her own, and she had already chosen where to find one. As Parker's fictional due date loomed closer, her internet searches took a darker turn. No longer content with researching how to fake a pregnancy, she began studying how to obtain an actual baby. Investigators would later find searches for how to perform a C-section, how to cut a baby out of a mother, and how long can a baby survive after mother dies. These weren't random queries, they were research for what she was planning to do. Parker first explored legal ways. She contacted adoption agencies but was quickly dismissed due to background checks. She reached out to pregnant women offering to help them. No one took the bait, so her desperation grew by the day. That's when she began focusing on Reagan Hancock. The 2 women weren't close friends but knew each other through mutual connections in their small community. Parker had been watching Reagan's pregnancy announcements online, noting her due date, tracking her progress. In the weeks leading up to October 9th, Parker purchased a scalpel set and studied anatomy diagrams. She researched the effects of various medications during pregnancy. She watched videos of cesarean sections. She researched how much blood loss would cause death. She even conducted a practice run, telling her boyfriend she was going to a prenatal appointment on October 8th, just one day before the murder. Instead, she drove to the Hancock home, apparently surveying out the location and confirming Reagan would be alone the next morning. Each step was calculated, each move planned in advance. Taylor Parker wasn't acting on impulse. She was executing a carefully crafted plan to steal not just a baby, but a life. October 9, 2020, morning in New Boston. Reagan Hancock's husband had already left for work. At home were Reagan, just weeks from her due date, and her 3-year-old daughter. Shortly after 10 a.m., Taylor Parker arrived at the Hancock home. What happened inside those walls would later be pieced together through forensic evidence and Parker's own statements to police. The attack was quick and brutal. Parker struck Reagan multiple times in the head, possibly stunning her. A struggle broke out, evidenced by overturned furniture and Reagan's defensive wounds. Despite being heavily pregnant, Reagan fought for her life, but Parker overpowered her. Using a scalpel she had brought with her, Parker cut into Reagan's abdomen while she was still alive. The medical examiner would later determine that Reagan was conscious during at least part of this unimaginable horror. She died from blood loss and the trauma of the crude C-section. Amid the brutal attack, Reagan's 3-year-old daughter was somewhere in the house. Whether she witnessed the attack or was in another room remains unclear. The thought of a child potentially hearing or seeing her mother's murder added another layer of horror to an already unfathomable crime. Around 1 p.m., Reagan's mother arrived at the house to check on her daughter. What she found was a scene of carnage so disturbing that first responders, many of them veterans of decades on the force, would later describe it as the worst they had ever witnessed. The 911 call captured the raw anguish. "My daughter had been murdered," Reagan's mother sobbed. "They took the baby. By the time paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do for Reagan, and the baby little Braxlyn Sage was nowhere to be found." After leaving the Hancock home, Parker drove away with baby Braxlyn still attached to the placenta. She hadn't bothered to cut the umbilical cord. Evidence of both her panic and her complete lack of medical knowledge despite all her research. Just before 10 a.m., Texas State Trooper Chad Norvell spotted a vehicle traveling at high speed along State Highway 82 in DeKalb, Texas, about 12 miles from New Boston. He pulled the car over for a routine traffic stop. What he found was anything but routine. Inside the vehicle, Parker was holding a newborn baby on her lap, umbilical cord still attached. The infant was pale, barely breathing. "I just gave birth on the side of the road," Parker told the officer, her clothes soaked in blood. Trooper Norvell immediately called for an ambulance. Parker and the baby were rushed to McCurtain Memorial Hospital in nearby Oklahoma. At the hospital, medical staff quickly realized something was wrong. The baby showed no signs of natural delivery. Parker had no signs of having given birth. When questioned, her story began falling apart within minutes. Meanwhile, word of Reagan Hancock's murder had spread through law enforcement channels. When investigators learned about a woman with a newborn who couldn't explain how she delivered it, the connection was made almost immediately. By 1 p.m., barely 3 hours after the murder, Taylor Parker was in police custody. The evidence was simply overwhelming. Reagan's blood on Parker's hands and clothes, the scalpel in her vehicle, and the dying infant, who matched the description of the baby, cut from Reagan's womb. Despite emergency medical efforts, baby Braxlyn did not survive. As investigators dug into Parker's background, the horrifying extent of her premeditation came to light. Her phone contained thousands of searches related to pregnancy, faking pregnancy, and performing cesarean sections. Even more disturbing were videos of actual births and C-sections found in her search history. When Parker's case went to trial in October 2022, the evidence was undeniable. Prosecutors presented her internet searches, text messages, and the testimony of those who had been deceived by her fake pregnancy. Medical experts detailed the brutal nature of Reagan's death and the trauma inflicted on baby Braxlyn. For those who had believed Parker's pregnancy, including her boyfriend, the truth was devastating. Many had given her gifts, thrown her baby showers, and supported her throughout her supposed pregnancy. Now they sat in the courtroom, confronting the horrific reality of her deception. In November 2022, the jury took less than an hour to find Parker guilty of capital murder. In the punishment phase, they needed just 2 hours to sentence her to death. For Reagan's family, no verdict could heal their wounds. They had lost not only Reagan, but also baby Braxlyn, and their surviving granddaughter had lost her mother in the most traumatic way imaginable. In a statement after the sentencing, Bowie County District Attorney Kelly Crisp said, "We are just so grateful that justice has been served today, not only for Reagan and Braxlyn, but also for the families." As Taylor Parker was led from the courtroom to begin her journey to death row, Reagan's mother told reporters, "My daughter was an amazing young woman with so much life ahead of her. No punishment can ever equal what was taken from us." Parker is currently on death row at the Mountain View Correctional Unit in Gatesville, Texas. A faked pregnancy, a calculated plan, a horrific murder that shook a Texas town to its core. The case of Taylor Parker reminds us that true monsters don't always lurk in shadows or wait decades to be caught. Sometimes they build their deception in broad daylight, hiding behind smiles and baby shower gifts. As Taylor Parker sits on death row at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, the community of New Boston continues to heal from wounds that may never fully close. Share your thoughts on this devastating case in the comments below. What warning signs do you think were missed? Which tragic case should we examine next? Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell to uncover more stories of justice served that remind us evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades. Because sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones we never suspect until it's too late.
New information shows how police used genealogy websites to try to identify the notorious Golden State Killer.
A decades-old serial killer case out in California. Police say they've now arrested the man known as the Golden State Killer.
You will forever be known as a repulsive coward who hid behind a mask of evil. The devil can keep you company in your prison cell as he gnaws away at whatever soul you have left, at whatever life you have left.
A dark figure moves silently through suburban neighborhood as California sleeps. The sound of a door being forced open, heavy breathing behind a ski mask, the terrifying click of a gun's hammer being pulled back. For over a decade, this phantom stalked through the night, leaving behind a trail of trauma, death, and police reports that would pile up by the hundreds. From 1974 to 1986, the state of California lived under the terror of one of the most notorious predators in American history. A man who would attack over 50 women, murder at least 13 people, and burglaries more than 120 homes across multiple counties and jurisdictions. Police knew him by many names: the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker. But the world would come to know him as the Golden State Killer, a monster who seemed to vanish without a trace, leaving detectives baffled for decades. Today we're exploring the case that redefined cold case investigations forever. After more than 40 years of freedom, a revolutionary DNA technique would finally put a name and face to the faceless terror, revealing a truth more shocking than anyone could have imagined. June 18, 1976, Sacramento County. A woman wakes in the dead of night to find a man standing in her bedroom doorway. The beam of a flashlight blinds her. She can't see his face, only the glint of a knife and the outline of a ski mask. Within moments, her life changes forever. This attack would be the first in a series that left Sacramento County paralyzed with fear. But what investigators didn't realize at the time was that this wasn't truly the beginning. The man they would later call the East Area Rapist had been honing his methods for years, likely starting as the Visalia Ransacker, a burglar who conducted over 100 break-ins in Central California before mysteriously disappearing. By late 1976, a disturbing pattern had emerged. The attacker didn't choose his victims randomly. He studied them, stalked them, sometimes for weeks. He knew their schedules better than they did, one detective noted. The attacker would enter neighborhoods days before an assault, learning escape routes, identifying dogs, and even hiding straps under couch cushions in preparation. But then came a twist that shocked even the most experienced investigators. He began calling potential victims beforehand. "Is Ray there?" a caller would ask. When told he had the wrong number, he'd apologize. Days or weeks later, the woman who answered would become his next victim. These weren't misdials, they were tactics to target. As the attacks kept happening, ordinary neighborhoods changed overnight. People rushed to buy guns. Neighbors united together for nightly patrols, clutching baseball bats and flashlights as they walked streets they once felt safe on. Neighborhoods once filled with open doors and unlocked windows became fortresses. Meanwhile, police found themselves chasing mere shadows. Despite massive task forces, roadblocks, and undercover operations, the rapist continued his reign of terror. In one shocking turn, he attacked a victim despite knowing a town hall meeting about his crimes was happening that very night. A meeting attended by the victim's husband. By 1978, the East Area Rapist had attacked over 30 women in Sacramento County alone, but his methods were evolving in a disturbing direction that would blindside investigators completely. He was learning to kill. Just when Sacramento thought they might catch him, the attacks suddenly stopped. Police wondered if their manhunt had finally scared him off or if he'd been arrested for another crime. The truth was far worse. He hadn't stopped, he'd moved. October 1, 1979. Golta, a quiet suburb near Santa Barbara. Dr. Robert Offerman and his girlfriend Deborah Manning are found dead in Offerman's condo, both bound, both shot multiple times. A strange detail catches the detective's attention: dishes of ice cream left on the counter half-eaten. The killer had forced them to eat while he watched. No one connected these murders to the Sacramento rapist, not yet. Different counties, different police departments, and no computers to share information across jurisdictions. This communication gap gave him the perfect cover. By 1980, a terrifying new pattern emerged in Southern California. The attacker now targeted couples. He would tie up both victims, take the woman to another room, then return to beat or kill the man. For some mysterious reason, he'd started leaving behind signs of eating their food during the attacks. In March 1980, he murdered Charlene and Lyman Smith in Ventura. 3 months later, Keith and Patrice Harrington in Dana Point. Then Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez in Golta. Detectives were baffled by his ability to vanish. In one attack, a witness saw him biking away. Police set up roadblocks for miles. Somehow he still escaped. What nobody knew was that the man they hunted had once been one of them. He knew exactly how police work was done, because he'd done it himself. May 5, 1986. 18-year-old Janelle Cruz is found beaten to death in her Irvine home. The familiar signs are there: the careful entry, the bindings, the brutality. What investigators don't realize is that this would be the Golden State Killer's final known victim. And then, nothing. The phone calls stopped. The break-ins ceased. The murders ended. As months turned to years and years to decades, the case files gathered dust. Some detectives retired, others died. The victims tried to rebuild shattered lives, but the shadow of what happened lingered over California like a persistent fog. Larry Poole, a cold case investigator with the Orange County Sheriff's Department, stared at boxes filled with thousands of pages of reports. It was 1997, more than a decade after the last known attack. Poole was determined to link the Southern California murders to the Northern California rapes despite skepticism from colleagues. "Everyone thought I was crazy," Poole would later recall. But the similarities were undeniable. Every promising lead evaporated. A convict resembling the composite sketch died in prison. DNA tests cleared him. Another suspect was ruled out through fingerprints. Hair samples collected in the 70s proved useless. For the survivors, life was a constant battle. Many moved dozens of times, unable to feel safe in their own homes. Some slept with weapons, others with lights on. All of them watched the shadows. By 2010, most people had forgotten about the East Area rapist and the original Night Stalker, but a small group of detectives wouldn't let the case die. They just needed someone to bring the right kind of attention to it. Michelle McNamara, not a detective, not a forensic analyst, a crime writer with an obsession. In 2011, while researching unsolved crimes for her blog True Crime Diary, McNamara stumbled upon the case files of the East Area rapist original Night Stalker. What began as curiosity quickly consumed her life. "There's a scream permanently lodged in my throat now," she wrote about her growing fixation with the case. McNamara dug through dusty boxes of evidence, interviewed survivors, and connected with retired detectives. She even gained access to police files that had been sealed for decades. It was McNamara who gave him the name that would finally stick: the Golden State Killer. Her husband, comedian Patton Oswalt, would later describe finding her at 3 a.m. hunched over crime scene photos at their kitchen table. "I'm going to find him," she'd say, barely looking up. McNamara's research turned into a major article for Los Angeles magazine in 2013. The public's interest in the forgotten monster surged. HBO announced a documentary. Her book deal followed. The case was breathing again. Then came a cruel twist of fate. On April 21, 2016, McNamara died in her sleep from an undiagnosed heart condition combined with medication effects. She was 46 years old. Her book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, remained unfinished. Oswalt gathered her research notes and enlisted help to complete her work. The book was published posthumously in February 2018, becoming an instant bestseller. What McNamara couldn't have known was that justice was already closing in, through a method so new it barely existed when she began her search. While Michelle McNamara's book climbed bestseller lists in early 2018, a small team of investigators had already begun an unprecedented hunt using tools that seemed like science fiction just years earlier. Paul Holes, a cold case investigator who'd spent 24 years on the Golden State Killer case, had a radical idea. What if they took the killer's DNA and plugged it into a genealogy website? The kind people use to find distant relatives. In April 2018, the team uploaded the killer's DNA profile to GED Match, a public database where people voluntarily share their genetic information. Within hours, they had matches, not to the killer himself, but to his distant relatives. It was like suddenly having a map when you've been lost for decades, Holes would later say. Investigators built sprawling family trees tracing connections through great-grandparents and distant cousins. The trees merged on one branch. Narrowing further, they identified potential suspects. One name stood out: Joseph James D'Angelo, a 72-year-old man living in Citrus Heights, a suburb of Sacramento, just miles from where the attacks began. D'Angelo had no criminal record. He lived in an ordinary house on a quiet street, but something about him caught the investigators' attention. He had been a police officer in the 1970s working in Auburn, near where many of the rapes occurred. A team began surveillance. They collected a discarded soda can from his trash, then a used tissue from his car door handle. The DNA was tested, and it matched. This discovery stunned even veteran detectives. The monster who had terrorized California had been one of their own, a police officer who used his training to commit perfect crimes and escape capture, a man who understood police procedures because he had helped create them. On April 24, 2018, as D'Angelo backed his car out of his garage, officers swarmed in. The Golden State Killer's reign was finally over. When police arrested Joseph James D'Angelo outside his home, they didn't find the terrifying predator of the 1970s. Instead, they encountered a frail, 72-year-old grandfather who pretended to be weak and confused. "I have a roast in the oven," he told officers as they handcuffed him. At a quickly arranged press conference, Sacramento District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert announced the arrest. Survivors and victims' family members, some who had waited over 40 years for this moment, wept openly as cameras flashed. D'Angelo's first court appearance shocked many. Confined to a wheelchair, appearing thin and weak, he barely resembled the athletic young man who had scaled rooftops and outrun police cordons decades earlier. But investigators noted something. When alone in his cell, D'Angelo moved with surprising agility, dropping the frail act when he thought no one was watching. In June 2020, faced with overwhelming DNA evidence and seeking to avoid the death penalty, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnapping. He also admitted to dozens of rapes and burglaries that couldn't be charged due to the statute of limitations. The sentencing hearing in August 2020 gave survivors their chance to speak directly to the man who had terrorized them. For 3 days, they described shattered lives, decades of nightmares, and relationships destroyed by trauma. One survivor looked directly at D'Angelo and declared, "The devil can keep you company in your prison cell." On August 21, 2020, the judge sentenced D'Angelo to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was wheeled out of the courtroom for the last time, the Golden State Killer's reign of terror was officially over. Not with a scream, but with the quiet click of a prison door. As Joseph James D'Angelo spends his remaining years behind bars, his case sends a warning to killers everywhere. Science is catching up to your darkest secrets. What do you think should be the right punishment for such an evil being? Also, which notorious cold case do you think we should unravel next? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell to uncover more cold cases which remained a mystery for years, but couldn't be kept hidden forever. Because the truth always finds a way out of the shadows.